everyone, welcome to this week's episode of No Such Thing as a Fish. Before we start, a little bit of news that is very important to Anna and I, and that is that our new book is finally out in paperback. Woohoo! I know that might not seem like a big deal to you, but honestly, this is a real chance for us to get more people reading this book. One very interesting thing to say is that the book has had a name change. What used to be called Everything to Play For is now called A Load of Old Balls, The QI History of Sport by James Harkin and Anna Toshinsky. A lot of people have said to us, why did you not call it that in the first place? I'm not sure if they're being rude. I hope not, because it is a book full of the most interesting facts and stories about sport that you can possibly imagine. Even if you're not into sport, probably this summer you will notice that everyone's off watching the Euros, everyone's off watching the Olympics. Perhaps you don't really have much to say to those people when it comes up at a dinner party. Well, read our book and you will be the pinnacle of all sporting knowledge, and all quite interesting sporting knowledge at that. As you imagine from me and Anna, it's just full of silly stories, fun facts. We spent so much time doing loads of in-depth research in there that even if you are the kind of person who's watching every single sporting event this summer, there will be loads of stuff in there that you didn't know. So if you go to anywhere where you would normally buy your books, then look for A Load of Old Balls, The QI History of Sport, or search for our names, James Harkin and Anna Toshinsky, and you will find that book. Please do buy it. It would mean the world to us if you did. Of course, we're going on tour. Don't forget that. People in Scotland, Wales, England, Ireland, New Zealand, Australia, do get your tickets very, very soon. A lot of them are sold out. I know we've got quite a few tickets left for the Scottish dates in Edinburgh and Glasgow, and I think quite a few for the show in Cardiff. So if you're in any of those cities, then do get your tickets. But actually, go to nosuchthingasafish.com/live and you will see all of the dates where we're playing, and hopefully one of them will be near you. Okay, not much more to say apart from on with the podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of No Such Thing as a Fish, a weekly podcast coming to you from the QI offices in Holborn. My name is Dan Schreiber, and sitting here with Andrew Hunter-Murray, Anna Toshinsky, and James Harkin. And once again, we have gathered around the microphones with our 4 favorite facts from the last 7 days, and in no particular order, here we go. Starting with fact number 1, and that is my fact. My fact this week is that snooker games on cruise ships are sometimes played with flat balls.
Are we talking about the balls on the table or the
the men playing? Yeah, this is obvious when you think about it.
Oh, it's so obvious.
It's so obvious when you think about it.
I don't really know how you could play snooker on a cruise ship with a ball-shaped ball, actually.
Well,
on a rough cruise ship.
We'll get to that in a sec, because you can, and there's a pretty awesome way that you do that. But this I got from a book that's written by an Australian comedian called Hung Lee. It's called The Crappiest Refugee. He tells the story of from immigrant boat to cruise ship comedian. Anyway, he wrote this book, and inside the book, he mentions that he's seeing a bunch of guys playing on a pool table or a snooker table, and they are hitting with puck-like objects, because obviously in the rough seas, the balls are going to be rolling around. And so there will be cruise ships out there that have these tables on them.
And the idea, I think, is like, air hockey.
Yeah.
It's those kind of like puck things, isn't it?
Exactly. Now, to your point, Anna, a modern day cruise ship does have pool tables or snooker tables, billiards, but they use gyroscopic technology.
What?
So it's amazing.
No.
Yeah, it's honestly, I've watched videos of it online. It's so cool because basically while the rest of the ship is moving, the pool table isn't.
That's insane.
Just the top of the pool
That's
table.
a high-end.
Yeah.
That's a high-end cruise ship. I
It's
think.
amazing.
insane.
It is incredible.
I've read stories of people finding it so fascinating that, like staring to fire, sometimes people will just go and sit and watch it as it doesn't sway. There's even stories of crew members that when they get particularly sick, they'll go and sleep on the pool table.
No,
Yeah, because the
It's not
seasickness is
moving.
getting to them. It's not moving, so you can have a restful night.
That's
Which, Begs the question: why isn't every bed on a boat
Gyroscopic.
Probably price.
Cost.
Yeah.
How good is the correction mechanism? Like, if you have a Titanic situation, how long can you continue with your game of snooker?
So it goes vertical.
Yeah, exactly.
I see that. Yeah.
So I met someone who was a dancer on cruise ships.
Oh yeah.
for a while,
This sounds
and
like a good anecdote.
She did the musicals because they often have a theatre on board and sometimes a show. And she said that the most difficult one she'd ever done was Starlight Express, where you're on roller skates. She said in rough weather, you would set off across the stage and you didn't know how soon you were going to arrive because it might be that you caught. The ship moved with you, and suddenly you're there like in half a second, or you're going against it and you just roll backwards.
So yeah, snooker. It's a good sport.
Mostly not played at sea.
Largely, it's a land-based game, isn't it? A land lovers game.
I did watch a TikTok yesterday, just coincidentally, of people playing on the beach. That looked really cool.
Snooker.
It was pool actually, but they kind of dug holes for the pockets and then would just hit the balls. There's no
So they played
fact-
on actual sand.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
There's no facts to this, but it did look pretty cool.
I'm
That's a
amazed.
fact.
I'm amazed that snooker in any form has made it to TikTok because snooker is famously quite a long game to watch. TikTok is not a long format.
Andy, honestly, if you could see my TikTok, it's just snooker, golf, cricket. It's the dullest TikTok because it just suggests things that you like, doesn't it? And it just works out what you like. I reckon if you were on TikTok, which I bet you're not, but you would just get Moss video after Moss video.
Yeah, that sounds
It's
very
amazing how it
calming.
works.
Yeah, but it is very slow, isn't it? As in or rather, it takes a long time. You play lots of frames in the course of a match.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because for anyone who doesn't follow snooker, only one person is playing at a time. That's weird.
Well, you play a frame, right?
Well, no,
Yeah,
but
so
like
you could play for
you
ages.
play until you mess up.
Yeah.
And then the other guy gets to have a go.
Yeah.
But whoever your opponent is, they have to stay in their chair.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
just stay in their chair watching you, and you could be playing for hours if you don't make a mistake.
Yeah.
It's just psychological torture. Are there any other games which are like that? Where I know tennis, you're only playing when your opponent is not playing, but that's
But usually it's quite soon before you're
Yeah,
playing
exactly,
again, isn't it? I don't know, actually. But that is one of the main things about snooker is the psychological angle of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
I think
Although
'cause-
Ronnie O'Sullivan said he likes it, obviously, because he's always going to be
Who?
Ronnie O'Sullivan. Who's Ronnie
I
O'Sullivan?
know he's a famous snooker player.
I would say Ronnie O'Sullivan and Don Bradman are the only two people, I don't know what James thinks about this, but who have excelled everyone else so much in their sport that it's like, whoa. So Ronnie O'Sullivan is the best snooker player ever.
Okay.
And he hates the fact that it's so slow, for instance, because he's this mercurial, crazy character with an amazing history, and he likes snooker to be super fast. So I think he's got pretty much all the records for fastest break. But yeah, he's amazing, and he's got such an interesting history. His dad went to prison for murder when I think Ronnie was about 16.
Yeah, he was a millionaire though. So
Was he?
even though his dad went to prison for murder, he was from a very affluent background because
Interesting.
his dad ran a lingerie shop or something like that. I think.
I believe he may have called them lingerie shops in the newspaper ads, but I think they were sex shops.
I mean, potato. You say potato, I say vibrator. Yeah, so and I think some of the other snooker players who came from less affluent backgrounds kind of point to that and say, you know, we're working class, but Ronnie actually was quite rich when he was growing up.
Interesting, because it was heavily embedded probably in that gang culture a bit. It was one of the Cray brothers, the third Cray brothers driver who he murdered in a nightclub, I think.
Sorry, the third Cray brother.
Yeah,
I didn't know there was a third Cray. You hear about the Cray twins?
I know, he was very much the...
It's like the third Chuckle brother.
Yeah.
He and the third Cray brother must have like given each other a wry look sometimes across the East End clubs.
They both have that picture of Bramwell Bronte in their house.
That's so neat. That's so neat.
Imagine a joke that has the Crays, the Chuckle brothers, and Bramwell Bronte in it.
We got the Jonas brothers as well. They've got the extra brother who's called Bonus Jonas, who is the one that just isn't in the band and does his own thing all the time.
No
Yeah,
way.
Bonus Jonas. Snooker's got fairly sort of poshish sort of foundations, doesn't it? Because it was invented by, supposedly, this is the big story, by Neville Chamberlain, not the Prime Minister, but apparently a cousin. The reports are a bit dodgy, but apparently he was in India in the 1800s, and he basically incorporated two existing games. There was one called Blackpool, and there was another which was called Pyramid. And so one was played entirely with red balls, and that was in a pyramid shape. So he was like, well, love the pyramid shape. And then the other one had all the other color balls in it, and he he brought that over, smashed them into one big game with the pyramid, and then just kept yelling snooker at people as they were playing. And by the end of the game, he'd called everyone snooker, and so it stuck.
Why did you call someone? What did it mean? Did it mean dickhead?
I think it was a sort of term for an idiot, as someone who was incompetent at whatever task they were doing, a rookie.
I see.
Yeah.
It is weird though, because he said he invented it in 1875. He only said that in 1938, which is a substantial amount of time later. That's what?
Yeah.
63 years later.
Yeah.
63 years later. And he was an army officer already when he invented this. So he must have been knocking on. But the claim was accepted, and I think it's sort of widely accepted that that is where it comes from.
Yeah.
But also the other weird thing about snooker, that name thing you were saying, Dan, is so if you snooker someone, is it that I need to hit a red next, but I'm behind the yellow or whatever?
Precisely.
So that is unusual as well, because it's a move in the game where you've messed things up for someone else.
Yeah.
Which is isn't croquet like that? It's
Yeah.
a bit
Yeah,
like that.
you can croquet someone.
Croquet and croquet someone.
I think there is a connection between croquet and snooker, really.
Yeah.
I think snooker kind of grew out of croquet-like games.
Yeah.
And that's why
Yeah.
that's why the table's green, because it was like originally played on grass and stuff.
Right.
The bays.
The beige, yeah.
Which has to have. Do you know the difference between the bays in snooker and pool? I got a bit too into table makeup actually.
Ooh,
Wow. No.
Is it the nap?
Yeah, I was going to almost disqualify you from answering this question, James.
Full disclosure, I am very much into snooker.
Yeah, you're not allowed to answer any more quiz questions in this section.
What's the nap?
So the nap is the way that the kind of hairs on the substance that the table is made of bend. So basically, in snooker, you have to have a nap. And that means that it's a little bit like if you imagine a velvet surface. In fact, if you look at those cushions over there.
I'm having a nap listening to this explanation.
Andy, this is fascinating
Sorry,
stuff.
go on.
Okay.
Yeah,
You look at those cushions over there, they're velvety. You stroke them one way and they look smooth. You stroke them the other way and they look rough.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And that's like a snooker table. It has to have that effect. And it really affects how the ball travels, because as you can imagine, if the little hairs, fibers are standing up a certain way, and depending on the angle at which it's hitting them, you really have to work with the nap.
So if you aim for a shot in the middle pocket, you
Yeah.
have to aim slightly outside the pocket, because the nap will make it naturally bend towards the pocket.
So interesting. So part of the gameplay is literally getting your face close to the table and seeing how the nap is looking?
No, it's always the same.
Yeah.
It always
always
goes-
the same?
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
Right.
I actually read in a really furious blog that a man who has heard of people who install their own tables putting the nap on back to front, which is obviously an absolute disaster.
Doesn't it just go the other way then? Or do you mean upside down?
No, I think he means it goes the other way, so it will go slow when it should go fast.
But you would
vice
be
versa.
used to it. Like, you would be very
Yeah.
much used to it being one way.
Yeah,
I got a question.
Definitely.
Are you allowed to comb the table before your pot
So
shot?
Yeah.
before every frame, yeah, probably someone will come on and give the table a quick comb. And also you are allowed to kind of flatten it. If you see a bit come up a
Okay.
little bit, you are allowed to flatten it with your hand.
Mid-game.
Yeah, mid-shot, like not mid-shot, but just before your shot, you're allowed to do
A
that.
bit of the rugs rucked up.
Yeah,
and
you
you're
are
just
allowed to
smoothing
do
it
that.
out.
Like
Which one would
that.
be like curling, wouldn't
Yeah.
it? Again, front.
That would be a game.
Yeah.
So actually, snooker isn't played on a snooker table. It's played on a billiards table.
What?
Because billiards was invented before it, and then snooker was played on the billiards table, and we still call it a billiards table rather than a snooker table officially.
So what gets played on a snooker table?
There's no such thing.
There's no such thing as a snooker table.
Well, it's just another word for a billiards table, I guess.
Right.
That's great.
And what's billiards?
So billiards is a game where you have 3 balls only on the table, and the rules say you get a point by either potting one of the balls or by hitting one ball onto the other, right? And then if you get a point, you get another go, and you get another go, and another go, and another go, until you stop getting points, and then your opponent comes on the table. Okay, so a bit like snooker, your opponent sat there for quite a long time just watching you play.
Yeah.
But in 1907, a new technique was discovered where, you know, the pockets in snooker where the ball goes into.
Yeah.
What this guy called Walter Lovejoy managed to do was to get 2 balls stuck in the pocket. And so he could just tap these 2 balls every time, and they would always hit the cushion or hit each other.
Wow.
And he could do that again and again and again and again. And there was a game a bit later between Tom Chapman and Tom Rees, where Tom Rees managed to score 499,135 points by using this technique over 85 hours and 49 minutes. of
Wow.
Oh, what a
Really making a
tedious
point
person.
there.
Is it illegal now as a technique? Or
It's illegal as a technique. And also, like, this record was never in the record books because all of the fans went home, the referee went home, and even his opponent went home.
Wow.
That's so good.
I worry about this guy's home life. It sounds like he didn't have much to go back to.
I think it's great. I didn't know that pocket billiards was real. I thought it was a vulgar euphemism all my life, and actually it's a proper game.
And what is it?
It's just a smaller version of billiards. Oh. Or it's slang for messing around with yourself.
I would stop playing pocket billiards, is what you'd say to someone.
Yeah.
If they were
not heard that.
masturbating in public.
Yeah, right. Oh, okay.
Just don't get them mixed up. That's all I'm saying.
I thought I was getting away with it all this time. I think I'm playing billiards.
Oh, dear. Stop the podcast.
Stop the podcast.
Hi, Daniel Schreiber. Do you like wine?
James Harkin, I love wine.
Oh, well, have I got the deal for you. What's your favorite kind of wine?
Ooh, I love a white or a red or that pink, the pink one. Into that.
Yeah. But the thing is, you, like me, probably know that you like wine, but you don't know specifically the kind of wines that you like. Or maybe there's one that you get all the time, but you'd like to open up your world of wine. And the way to do that, let me tell you, is to go to Naked Wines.
Yeah, Naked Wines is an amazing company. Over 300,000 people in the UK are already signed up to it. It is a curator of all the best wines that are made by independent makers out there, and it gets tailored specifically to your taste buds.
Absolutely. You can get a third off what you pay for similar wines in the high street. And if you ever find one you don't like, there's a 100% hassle-free guarantee. They'll give you your money back.
Yeah, it's amazing. And if you want to test this out, you can get your first order for less than £6 a bottle by going to nakedwines.com/fish, and you'll get 50% off your first order.
That's right. So whether you like red, white, green, brown, orange, purple, pink...
There's brown...
Let's hope not. Try Naked Wines today for just $34.99 for 6 wines with free delivery. And to get that, you go to Naked Wines. That's nakedwines.com/fish. Terms and conditions apply. That's nakedwines.com/fish to get your first order for less than £6 a bottle.
All right. On with the show.
On with the podcast.
Okay, it is time for fact number 2, and that is Anna.
My fact this week is that one of the major battles in the Cold War was to see who was better at squashing metal.
Was it to get rid of the Iron Curtain?
Brilliant. Oh my God.
Lovely.
This is the Heavy Press program, which sounds kind of like a raunchy sexual program, but it wasn't.
You get turned on by very different things to me, Anna.
No, I'm with Anna. This
Fancy coming around to my place for a heavy press.
I don't know.
No, I'm just going to stay at home, do some pocket billiards.
The Heavy Press program was launched by the US in response to the fact that the USSR in the 1950s, it believed, had got very good at squashing metal. And the good thing about squashing metal is that it was a much better way of making aeroplanes. So it meant that you could put a huge ingot into a machine and squash it into the shape you wanted for a big bit of wing or something. And that would mean that it would be a lighter aircraft than if you just nailed together lots and lots of little bits, which is how you were making planes.
I've seen images of this thing, and it's so impressive. It's a ginormous structure, the one in America that we're going to get onto, which is a very famous one called the 50.
You say it's very famous, but I think it's only known because there's this one guy who's just written a series of amazing articles about it. It's one in The Atlantic, another in the New York Times, who's just really into it. And that was in Cleveland, Ohio. It still exists today. So I think they made 10 machines in the US, and they made 4 pressing machines where you squash metal and 6 extrusion machines where you squeeze it like toothpaste.
Wow.
And I think 8 of them are still going today.
It's nuts. Like, at the moment, every single US military aircraft contains bits made by this 50 machine.
By this
Really?
one machine, yeah.
I mean, these were built in the 50s.
Yeah.
They're still going today. The engineers of the 50 think it's going to be going in total for about 110 years.
Wow, can
Oh,
I
really?
ask why it's called the 50?
I think it was because it would exert 50,000 tons of compressive force, which is the equivalent of being able to lift up 500 blue whales.
Wow.
And it's massive. It's 87 meters high, so it looks huge.
It's so cool.
Yeah.
It's so cool. Honestly, this really awoke something in me, this machine. This really, brought my inner Clarkson to the fore. It's just really the most amazing machine in the world. It's so cool.
It is. I think it's the size and the majesty of them. And there are lots of them. So there are those in the US. And then, well, as I said, in the Cold War, the reason it became a fight was because Germany was actually the best at making them. So Germany had all this technology in the Second World War for pressing metal that no one else had. And as part of the agreement after the Second World War, we divided things up, and the USSR got their biggest heavy press. So they got the 30,000 ton pressing machine, whereas I think America only got about a 10,000 ton one. And I ended up reading all of these CIA documents spying on how Russia was using them and seeing, what are they doing with this thing? They're incredibly boring, aside from the word secret at the top. But yeah, they had to transport it back in 4 specially made train carriages from Germany to the USSR. But yeah, America were like, oh no, they've got this now. We'll have to make a big one.
But it partly relates back to the First World War, right? So in the First World War, again, lots of post-war reparations. Treaty of Versailles took a lot of things away from Germany, and there was a shortage of various key materials for the German economy and for their armaments and all of this. So they developed the technique of press forging, which is where you press down on the just because it's more efficient. And the one thing they'd been allowed to keep, or one of the things they were allowed to keep, was their magnesium, right?
What a treat.
The Allied powers said, we're not interested in your magnesium, so you
Right.
can have that. But the problem is that the previous method of forging things is basically big hammer, smashes down, smashes off.
Does it not explode if you hit magnesium? No.
If you put it, I think it's if you put water on it, isn't it?
Oh, yeah,
but it
that's
does
right.
crack. It doesn't forge well under the current forging conditions, and that's why Germany invented
That's
the
interesting.
Right.
technique of press forging, because they were working with the materials they had, and also they had to be as efficient as possible. So
Once again, shot yourselves in the foot with Versailles, didn't you, allies? But then actually, it playing the long game, you got the technology back.
sort of a no-score draw for the Treaty of Versailles. I mean,
I think that's right, yes.
Okay.
I think the Treaty of Versailles is a foe of the podcast because we give it a right kicking on this show, don't we?
true.
The highest pressure ever achieved is 770 gigapascals, which is more than twice the pressure in the inner core of the Earth.
Okay.
Yeah.
What did we do it for?
Well, it's just scientists, isn't it?
Yeah.
They wanted to see what happens if you squash osmium really.
And who's
a lot.
he?
Richard Osmium. He's the Roman Richard Osmium. It's the chemical element osmium, and they really squashed it with all this pressure, and they found out that it does not change its crystal structure.
Huh.
Wow.
Well, sometimes you've got to go through that experiment
You've
to find
got
out.
to
that-
find out, haven't
It's
you?
as important to find out nothing as to find out something.
I wonder if it's especially tough osmium, or it has
Yeah, it's
is it
the hardest
especially
one, I
dense?
think. Yeah.
Okay, that's cool.
Surely, otherwise it seems silly if it's just...
They didn't we'll start off by squashing a flump and see.
The biggest press now, I don't think gets much press. It's in Vienna, and it's made by an Italian company. Who would have thought?
I mean, not me.
I don't see any reason why the Italians wouldn't be good at pressing.
I suppose that most industrial things like that, Russia and China, sometimes America, and they do have the other big ones. But
Okay.
an Italian company have made it in Vienna, and it's called Tyson.
Is it to make lasagna sheets?
It
You
is.
can make a meatball that is as dense as the sun.
And yeah, that exerts 100,000 tons of force, which is the equivalent of being able to lift up 100 Eiffel Towers,
Wow.
which is impressive.
That's
That is
amazing.
a lot of
It is
Eiffel
amazing.
Towers.
And is it used for the same, just making like sheets of metal for airplanes and stuff?
Yeah, they do lots of stuff with like oil and gas industry and wind turbines and nuclear and
Yeah, right.
all things you would imagine need loads of metal.
I was reading into humans crushing metal.
Oh, yeah.
Because that is, it's a thing, and it turns out there's a lot of Guinness World Records for people who have done that in the past. So one of the records I found was the most cans crushed with shoulder blades in 1 minute.
Okay.
Now this is your
so
back shoulder
backwards,
blades,
yeah.
So you're sort of moving them together to create the crush. What do you reckon in 1 minute?
well, okay, question.
Queen.
Yeah.
Is someone putting the cans in your shoulders, or
Yeah.
do you have to place them there yourself? Because that feels tough.
So the record's held by Fabrizio Melito.
Okay,
And
another one for the Italians, sounds like.
Yeah.
exactly, yeah.
Crushing metal is just their forte.
And it was his brother Frank who would replenish the can in between the shoulder blades to be
Okay.
crushed. Yeah.
So, 84.
You're not far off. 68. 68.
Oh.
That's 10 more than someone managed to do it with their head in 1 minute. So 58 achieved with their head. But it's interesting because if you ever crush a can these days, it's really easy. It's very, and that used to be seen as like a Popeye or a Manly or raw kind of thing. And it turns out that did used to be that because cans were 40% stronger back in the day in terms of the material and the strength and the thickness.
This really shows how old I am, but I remember when aluminium cans came in. And that they were much easier to crush. It used to be that you could buy cans of pop and some of them would be aluminium and some of them wouldn't be.
Right.
And the aluminium ones were way easier to crush.
Were the previous ones steel?
I suppose they must
else?
have been. I'm not really sure, but I just remember Blue Peter had a thing where everyone had to crush cans and send them for recycling in the 80s.
Nice.
And so we were all into can crushing back then.
Right, well, yeah, of
the
course.
fad before Tamagotchis, that was what it was, wasn't it?
Can I read an introductory sentence to you?
Yeah.
It's
Is it from your new novel? Or
It's
what?
from, no, it's from a piece about another kind of forging, which is a thing called drop forging, and it's in Cudahy. I'm sorry, I'm sure I'm pronouncing it wrong. Milwaukee. And it begins like this: tucked away in a Cudahy warehouse, something big has been pounding away since 1959.
Jesus.
But this is a huge, great hammer. And this is the kind of thing where you just have a giant hammer to smash down on your metal and get it into the shape you want.
Right.
And this one, it weighs 1 million pounds, and it goes 5 floors above ground and also 5 floors below ground. So it's called a counterblow hammer, which is meaning that you are whacking
Above sides.
from
Oh,
above
right.
and behind, yeah,
Oh, cool.
above and below at the same time,
Like a crocodile.
It's so cool. It's just like flames and fire inside it, and it's just mashing away at these objects.
Right.
Yeah. Basically, that hammer, that gigantic hammer, has been in operation so long that you've got multiple generations of the same family who've been operating that hammer. So it's been going since 1959.
Nice.
Wow.
So there was a guy interviewed for this article saying, "Yeah, my grandfather worked on this hammer." God, I know.
What would happen if you put just a person in there?
Oh, they'd be in trouble. They'd be in such trouble.
They get just squished.
You'd be
they
pulled,
get-
but I'd love to see what that like. Does it look like a
You
Looney
would love
Tunes?
to
No.
see- It's not like Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Yeah, it's not that. Okay.
You would not love to see that. I can say.
Become a perfect two-dimensional human.
But it's a shame that's not on the list of options for you've got classic burial, cremation, obliterated by
Mashing.
mashed hammer. Yeah.
The flattening.
Can I tell you one thing about a cool destruction engine from the 19th century?
Go on.
Mm-hmm.
This is great. There was a great New Scientist piece about it, and it was called the Victorian Monster Destruction Engine, not its official name. But it was made by an engineer called David Kirkcaldy, who was Scottish. And he was the chief engineer behind this machine, which existed to smash metal, to tear it, to twist it, to crunch it, to bop it, to do all of this, to just... And it was because before his work, you could not test the components of a bridge, say. So, you just have to trust that the bridge you were building was strong enough.
Yeah, you've got some rivets. You need to know whether they're going to hold if you put a load of pressure on it. How do you do that?
Exactly that. And he built this gigantic machine. It was 116 tons, which at the time was huge. And its entire job was to tear things apart, and it could measure the tonnage at which, or the force that needed to be applied before things broke. And this changed engineering because... there was the Tay Bridge disaster in Scotland, and they went down to the riverbed after this awful disaster had happened. Lots of people died, and it was a really tragic event.
A really bad bit of poetry was written about it famously by McGonagall.
That's right.
The Tay Bridge disaster, as it became known.
And they went down and they got some of the lugs that had attached the bridge rods to the supporting columns, and it was found that they broke at 20 tons of pressure rather than the 60 that they should have done. So that ruined the career of the engineer who had said, no, these are fine and these are strong enough to support the bridge. So
I feel like they should have used buttresses, as many a wise man confesses.
It's a line from the
is
poem.
that genuinely a line from the poem?
yeah.
That's
Why?
good
Of all
memory.
the poems you could have memorized, why that one?
But
But
it
yeah,
was-
he made loads of bridges as well, didn't he? And they were shipped all over the world because he was the first person ever to test these things. So
It's
the
so
Sydney
cool.
Harbour
So
Bridge was all tested, but
Really?
in his one machine.
Yeah.
The various bridges in London, Hammersmith Bridge.
The family thing, like generations, the Festival of Britain in the 1950s was
Oh, yeah.
some of their structures were tested by his grandson. And I love this. It was, and certainly in 2014, there in a museum. I think it's in Southwark.
Still there.
And there used to be on the top floor a museum of fractures, which was a collection of broken pieces of metal. But tragically, during the Second World War, a bomb fell on it, and
And all the pieces came back together. It's like, what am I supposed to do with these?
and find a pristine Spitfire.
Okay, it is time for fact number 3, and that is James.
Okay, my fact this week is that in 18th century America, you could tell a merchant from a lawyer just by looking at their handwriting.
So
The lawyer would put little hearts over the eyes.
Yeah.
this is insane.
The merchant puts dollar signs.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? I didn't know this. It was in an article in The Atlantic, I read it, an article by Rachel Gutman Way. And she wrote that there were different font types for different jobs.
Yeah, so cool.
The handwriting of the merchants apparently was supposed to reflect the efficiency and speed with which they worked. And lawyers would have different scripts, aristocrats would have different scripts. And what would happen is you would be in your guild or whatever, or you would be taught to do this job. And when you were being taught it, they would teach you particular ways of writing. So as the years went on, it would kind of get more and more enforced, this style of writing.
Because doctors are the only people today who've reputedly got a particular kind of handwriting, which is terrible.
Yeah.
As in,
Yeah.
I don't think that's a font, is it? Bad script.
I feel like journalists, I've seen journalists doing fast writing.
shorthand.
Yeah, shorthand,
Yeah.
which feels
Yeah.
very them.
And that's a sort of separate language to notate. But
Yeah,
you're talking
yeah.
about the English language written
Yeah,
in
so you would write
normal-
the same words, but you'd be able to read them and you'd be able to say, this person is a merchant, this person is a...
Could you
this.
masquerade? If I was a merchant wanting to pretend to be a lawyer,
I suppose you could, but it's
Yeah.
a bit like forging signatures.
Yeah.
Is, I guess, it's difficult, right? Because your signature you do naturally without thinking, whereas to forge it takes time, and sometimes it's not very easy to do it exactly.
yeah.
And you probably need other proofs that you're a lawyer. It probably wasn't that people would hire a lawyer by saying, "Can you just write your name on a bit of paper?" Looks like a lawyer's handwriting to me.
I'm in a Mrs. Doubtfire scenario in my head. I'm the aristocrat and the nanny in this. What I'm trying to do.
Right.
see
Well,
what I mean?
yeah.
one thing that might work there is that men and women had different handwriting as well.
That's so interesting.
So men had more masculine handwriting, they were taught, or muscular handwriting.
Muscular.
What does that even mean?
Well, muscular handwriting, according to someone called Carla Peterson, who is a professor of English at the University of Maryland, they used more pressure on the pen.
I'm just
holes in the paper.
50,000 tons of force on every letter.
Yeah.
And women had more like an italic cursive
Yeah.
handwriting.
What I thought was so interesting about this fact is that I hadn't really considered until now the fact that we were all taught a font. So basically the handwriting
Yes.
equivalent of font is script, and we were all taught a script. And of course we were. And when you see writing from the olden days, like if I look at collections of letters written by, like my grandparents had old letters written by their grandparents from the 19th century, the handwriting is so different. And that's because official styles changed.
Yeah.
And so there was this thing called Spencerian script in the 1900s, which President Garfield called the pride of our country.
Wow.
It's that
America's done so much stuff.
That's the biggest one.
Is that the biggie?
That's the biggest
Really?
Spencerian. The guy who came up with this, Platt Rogers Spencer, said he was inspired by pebbles on a beach. And it is sloping. It's got to be at an exact angle of 52 degrees, sloping forwards, and slightly rounded.
Okay. And was that like basically Americans would write that like that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I know, like, for instance, my wife writes in a Russian font, which is different than an English font for sure.
Yes. Yeah. There's lots of chat about the different ways that different European countries still write.
So Platt Rogers Spencer spent so much time trying to get it to be the standard writing style they were teaching in schools and so on, to the point where it feels very missionary. When he died, his sons then took textbooks of it and they sort of went out and campaigned for it to be changed. Have you tried this font style? You can go to schools and hand them. And
And then sort of people start reading the book and say, no, don't read the words, just look at the letters.
Yeah, exactly.
So weird.
Yeah, and then it did get taken over by a thing called Zena-Bloser method, and then that eventually got taken over by another. So we've got generational changes within how we write.
You can tell when texts come from, right? Because you can, and like there's a thing called paleography, is that it? It's old writing, and it's the study of old writing. You do courses in it, because if you look at a text from hundreds of years ago, even if it's in English, it's going to be really hard to decipher.
It's how to
Yeah.
recognize time travelers, I suppose, is that they have different handwritings.
That's
to the
it.
rest of us.
Yes.
Yes, it'd be so obvious if someone suddenly started writing in that Gothic script that, as you say, you can barely read it. It looks so different, doesn't it? So hard to
I was
distinguish.
thinking people from the future might write, like, for instance, in block capitals or something.
Hello.
Oh, wow.
Busted.
Finally.
So Spencerian, just very quickly before we wrap up on that, that did go out and these other fonts took over, but it did embed itself in society and we see it virtually every day. So it was a win for Platt, Roger,
It's
Spencer.
guessable.
Oh, yeah, it should be. Think of...
Ingredients lists on packets of food.
Oh, they're
they
always
all
in
one
handwriting, aren't they?
Okay. I'm just warming up.
Something that's in handwriting.
Yeah.
Okay,
We
that we
don't
see
see much in
something on a banknote, like the I
good.
promise to pay the bearer.
No, it's a logo.
It's a logo in
NHS.
handwriting.
It
Cadbury's.
That's a great call.
It is a
think that
food
is
and
close.
drink product, and it is not anything that you've said. It's a drink.
Coke.
Lucozade.
Coca-Cola.
Of
Coca-Cola.
course, that lovely. You're right.
Yeah.
That rounded cursive.
That rounded
I
cursive.
forgot what the question was.
So it was basically phased out Spencerian, but he managed to have an impact staying. And Ford Cars is also the way that Ford is written is based on Spencerian.
That is great.
What a legacy.
That's
Great legacy.
That's kind of time travel, but the normal way around. You know, like a survivor. It's like those animals that you find, which we thought you went extinct 130 million years ago, but here you are swimming around.
Like a
you know?
coelacanth of
Yeah.
handwriting.
Yeah, it's a Coca-Cola canth.
Did you set me up for that joke or not? 'Cause
No.
It felt like it.
I
It felt like I walked straight into a bear trap there.
We should probably say that handwriting evolved for practical reasons. So it was all about these people saying this is a quicker way to write, and this is an easier way to write, this is an easier way to teach. Or the reason that Gothic, which was invented in the 12th century-ish, that was quite squashed up, and it was because there was parchment shortages, and so you could fit much more on the page. So it's all practicalities, which feels relevant when it's enforced today, because people say, isn't it sad that no one learns proper cursive anymore? And there are a number of American states that enforce it legally, and there isn't really evidence that there's particularly a purpose to
Cursive
doing
is just
it.
joined up handwriting, right?
Yes.
It can tell you a lot about someone, their handwriting.
Yeah.
Well, no, it can't really. But it can tell you how drunk they are.
Oh, that's good.
Of all these kind of graphology things, which is you're supposed to be able to tell people's personality or whatever from their handwriting, most of it does seem to be made-uppy, but definitely for sure the height of ascending letters, height of descending letters, spacing between words, tremors,
Bit of sick on the page.
the height of the upper and lowercase letters all changes depending on how much alcohol you've had.
That's good. That's very good.
That's got to be one of the most pointless studies ever done to conclude that handwriting declines with alcoholism.
Did you find the BIG?
No.
Notorious?
Notorious British Institute of Graphologists. They're real.
They're pretty hardcore, aren't they?
They are.
That's really funny.
And their claim, and I think don't think it's backed up by solid evidence, is that it's better than therapy, because actually with therapy you can only know what the client has told you.
Okay.
Right?
Oh, I
Whereas with
see.
graphology, you just look at the writing and you say, "Well, that's disgusting. I can't believe you had that dream," or whatever.
Yeah,
you know.
you're not a merchant. You're a lawyer.
We did a debunk of graphology on QI once and got very angry emails.
And letters, didn't we?
Handwritten.
Yeah, we got one letter from a graphologist saying that some of the evidence is if you get a pen and put it in your mouth and try and write something on a piece of paper, you'll use the same movements as if you were to do it with your hand. Like, so Andy would write it with his same sort of spidery handwriting with his mouth as he would with his hand. And that's evidence that it's coming directly from your brain as opposed to being something in your hands or whatever. As in it's inherent in yourself, the shape of your letters.
Is that claim true in either sense? Like, is it true that there's any correlation between mouth and hand, or that you could draw that conclusion?
All I'm giving is both sides of the story, like I'm on the BBC.
Good on you, mate.
But no, that's what they claim. But of course, I think these days we think
It's
that
nonsense.
it's
Unless you're listening to this podcast on BBC Sounds, in which case the jury's out.
I do wonder if we were able to bring back certain people from history and just say, "Oh, I love your book called that," and they go, "That's not what that's called," and it's because they're bad handwriting. There's a few cases where people claim this is a thing. So apparently, Beethoven's piece for Elise, apparently that's not the title.
What? It's
Apparently
called Furry Leaves.
Apparently, it's for Therese.
No.
Yeah, it's Therese or Teresa. It's either that. Or it's,
No
yeah,
way.
but his
Wow.
handwriting is so dodgy that well, we'll just go with Elise.
Are all the notes different as well?
That's so funny.
Well, if you're worried about bad handwriting, which I always was in exams, because I have quite a legible, small handwriting, and I always thought, they're never going to read this gold. I happened to be on the OCR, which is one of the famous exam boards, OCR exam board page, FAQs page, and they clarified examiners are experienced at reading a wide range of handwriting, and if one examiner can't read it, it gets passed to another one, and so on.
Wow.
So I think if your handwriting's bad, it just gets passed to 20 different examiners.
That's so funny.
I know where it would end up.
Where?
At the
Where?
very end, there is a lady on the Isle of Man who runs a firm called Transcription Services, and almost no one does what she does. She is just phenomenal at reading handwriting,
Really?
specifically old writing. Like the work by William Wordsworth, the Brontes, John Donne, it's all passed to her in the Isle of Man, and she's just amazing at it. And that is paleography.
Yeah, one person who was really difficult to decipher was Catherine Mansfield. I was reading about
really?
the New Zealand short story person. Her handwriting was so bad that when she died and left 53 handwritten notebooks, it took decades to decipher them. And the person who was doing it once spent an entire week trying to decipher a single word.
So the way you write can kind of show where you're from. I thought this was really interesting. So the way you write a T, for instance, which bit do you write first?
The
Don't even know.
I go the top.
I don't do the cross, basically.
You
don't
do the
cross your
last.
T's?
No, I do that
Oh,
last.
right, okay, yeah.
Don't cross your T's, imagine that. I'll see you tomorrow.
See you later.
So presumably, Dan, actually, what do you write first?
Well,
you write all in capitals, so it's
no,
kind of
no, no. But
Who writes the cross bit first?
well,
what's the cross bit? Do you mean?
The cross your T's. What? The bit that goes across?
I do.
You write the cross
Okay,
first.
here, if I was
Look.
writing
Can I
that
see?
in lowercase,
Yeah.
I go.
guys, do you know what's so fascinating about this? Right?
Do it again.
What can Dan also write that none of the rest of us can?
Brilliant books about weird beliefs.
Or actually, I don't think he can write this. What can he speak and where was he brought up?
Oh, Mandarin.
Australian Mandarin.
Australian slang, yes. It's Mandarin writers write in lots of little short dashes. And so it makes sense for them to write, when they learn English, they tend to write the cross of the T first because it's lots of little figures. Whereas
interesting.
we would always write, and there's lots of little stuff like that. In Koreans, they write 9 backwards. Do you write your 9s backwards, Dan?
No, I don't know. You might tell me now that I do. I read it like that.
No, that's
Yeah,
like
that's all
everyone
right.
writes a nine.
That's normal.
I
Yeah.
wonder if I've got a cultural mesh going on because I will start that like that, but then I'll do that to end it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Gosh.
It's
There you
interesting
go.
because I've never seen you write in lowercase before.
Yeah,
I didn't know you could.
I am capable.
Wow.
I'm so sorry.
What do you think the school I went to taught?
Well, let's not go there.
Okay, it is time for our final fact of the show, and that is Andy.
My fact is that the sun is surrounded by a layer of moss. Hey.
Is it?
Space
No,
moss.
I mean, it obviously isn't. Andy.
So this is a thing which industry experts, sun experts,
Industry? The sun industry.
big science brains, they call moss. I love this. So this is in the sun's corona. We're outside the sun itself, and there are areas where the sun's magnetic field bursts out, and the gas that makes up the sun flows around these huge loops and then spears back down into the thing. It's all really, it's awesome. Anyway, and the moss is these sort of lacy patterns around the corona and around those coronal loops, around the feet of them, if you like. It's a term that NASA uses and lots of other
Weird, isn't
astronomers use it.
Of
Coronal
all the
moss.
sexy words you can use for lace-like structures, to use
Yeah.
moss, I feel like
Yeah.
Yeah, what would you have gone for?
Well, lace.
Lingerie. Lace.
Yeah, negligee.
Yes.
That's quite a cool,
Yeah.
I do think of it when I was reading about it. And yeah, you've described it pretty well there. It looks like a rainbow if you look at these coronal loops, and the moss is sort of at the bottom of them, so it's like the gold at the bottom of a rainbow.
Very
Oh,
nice.
lovely. What's really weird is I read that this is the case. There may be other reasons for it, but the reason those loops come out at all is largely to do with the rotation of the sun.
Right.
Yeah, so you've got basically, it takes 25 days at the equator to rotate, but at the poles, it takes 33 days. So you have this bit overtaking the outside, and it sort of snaps and it creates these big loops. It's sort of running past itself in a...
Yeah, it's
it's the weird rotation, the double rotation of the planet.
Yeah, well, because it's all gas, so it all kind of feels natural, right? That it would rotate at different levels. But yeah, that chaos that's generated.
Yeah.
But it seems like we still don't know a lot about the sun, which is quite exciting. And they're still discovering stuff about it, aren't they? I mean, this is all linked to that eternal mystery that why is the sun's atmosphere, the bit just above the surface of the sun, so hot? Which I think we might have mentioned before.
So hotter than the surface or even the core? It's the hottest there, is that what you're saying?
It's hotter than the surface, definitely. I'm not sure if it's hotter than the very core.
Yeah.
But-
It's so much hotter. So the surface of the sun is about 6,000 degrees Celsius. I think we can all agree. Very hot.
Yeah.
But the corona, the atmosphere, is 1,006,000 degrees Celsius. It's 1,000,000 degrees hotter.
And do you know NASA says that there are flares which they think might be between 10 and 40 million degrees Celsius. 40 million degrees.
So the sun's rotating, produces a magnetic field, right?
Yeah.
And then these lines of magnetic force, they get tangled and they build up pressure and they snap. And most of the energy goes outwards, but some of it goes back inwards into the sun. And the particles in the sun's lower atmosphere, they build up this pressure wave and it penetrates deep into the sun. And it becomes a sunquake. Just everything starts sounding like a cool title for a metal album. Sunquake.
Yeah.
I've been going around singing Sunquake. There's a group called the Solar Wind Sherpas who also sound pretty like cool and metal.
Sorry,
Anyway,
they're a band.
No, they're a
Oh,
group
right.
of scientists, but
Oh.
just anything sun related, like coronal moss or whatever.
That one doesn't quite work,
fine.
I gotta say.
Okay.
It's not metal, I don't
No
think,
matter
that
how
one.
much you put that voice on.
Fine. Okay.
Quite similarly, you get solar rain, which is actually lumps of plasma that fall down from these coronal rainbow loops. And when they splash into the chromosphere, the bit in between the atmosphere and the surface, they make a big splash and they send up loads more plasma.
We are Chromosphere. Wow. This is our album, Solar Rain.
What about-
you see?
Yeah, it's
We
good.
are the solar hedgerow. What about us?
bit rural, bit rustic, but nice.
Yeah, maybe
What's
like
a
the
cell-
Wurzels. I mean, it's not that interesting. It's just like filaments of mossy-like stuff from the sun that create loops that go in like a line, like a hedgerow might.
Nice.
But it is
Nice.
an official term, apparently.
That's cool.
Do you know who was the first person to take a photo of these filaments on the sun?
Ooh.
Oh, Samos.
It's someone we've heard of.
Oh, no.
Okay.
Nice.
So just
That narrows it
boom.
down.
You might
Sarah.
You might have come across her name. Annie Maunder, she was called. And she was married to Edward Walter Maunder. And she was probably the last of what was called the lady computers. So towards the end of the 19th century, this is obviously there were computers like for the space race and stuff like that, but these were women who would do the calculations when astronomers would come up with loads of data. They would give them to the women and the women would work them out and work out what was going on.
Amazing. Right.
And also the Maunder minimum is named after her, which you might have heard, which was a time in the 17th century when all sunspots disappeared.
Wasn't
Oh,
that
okay.
when it got very cold?
Yeah,
Was
the
that the Little Ice Age?
exactly.
Right.
That's
Was that
named
the
after
Maunder
her.
minimum? It's
Named
named after her. That's
and
so
her
cool.
husband as well. Yeah.
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 Nice.
That's awesome.
But so she's coming through data to find all this stuff. So amateur photographer on the
She
side?
was also a photographer on the side. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And she and her husband did photographs of the sun, and were doing it all the time. Basically, whenever there was a clear day, they would go out and photograph the sun.
How do you photograph the sun
years.
without? You need a special filter to stop it hurting your eyes.
There are lots
obviously.
of different ways of doing it.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, you can do it with a pinhole camera. Couldn't you?
I think you could largely just point it in the direction and press snap, can't you?
I think if you do that and you send the photos to Boots, you're going to get a sticker on them.
In Britain, you can photograph the sun pretty easily. There's sort of vague white dot obscured by cloud. That reminds me of the warnings when there are eclipses about what they can do to your eyes have been sort of mad to varying extents over the years. But I was reading about the eclipse in Melbourne in 1976, I think it was, when there was this doctor who sort of spread panic around the city saying there could be an epidemic of thousands of kids being completely blind because all you need to do is look at that for a couple of seconds and you can go blind. Now, it's not... It is exaggerated, this scaremongering, but it scared Melbourne into watching it from inside. So 2 million of the 2.5 million people there watched it on their tellies.
It is a problem, I think, with the eclipse, which is it is bad for you. And you can't say it's not bad for you.
Yeah.
But pretty much all the time, everyone says it's worse for you than it actually is. I think that's the problem.
So when Trump famously looked at the sun, that wouldn't have done...
It depends how long you do it for.
Depends how long you look at. I think you can tell if it's doing damage.
Bloody left-wing media spinning these stories to make him look bad.
We're not saying you should go and look at the sun.
That's the problem. Is you can't say that. You can't say go out and look at the sun right now.
It's a brilliant idea. Never to look at
give Trump a break. That's what I'm saying.
But yeah, it's like you've looked at the sun every now and then by accident for a second or so, right? And you're like, oh, that hurt my eyes, but you didn't go blind at any stage.
No,
because it's the eclipse. Isn't there a risk that people are going to try and look for longer than the tiny glimpse that
there is,
that
but
might
it
not do you
feels
any harm?
so much common sense that the only people who do get in trouble, and I think this was true in Britain when we had it in 1999, are people who are on lots of drugs. So there was a girl who'd taken lots of speed who stared at the eclipse for half an hour, and she did have some permanent eye damage.
Isaac Newton, there was a story that he stared at the sun and that
did.
sent him partially blind.
He did.
That was deliberately for an experiment to see what would happen if you stared at the sun.
Yeah,
for
so you
ages.
can be very, very clever and also very, very stupid. So I think it's just good to err on the side of caution and say never look anywhere.
I think
never
that's
look at anything.
fair. But I think one bit of good news is if you do go blind for staring at the sun for too long, is that there's a new invention that allows blind people to enjoy eclipses.
Really?
Yeah, it's called light sound, and it sort of measures and translates the sky's brightness and turns it into music. And so you can put your headphones in, and apparently it gives a really good impression of the change of the sun and the change of the brightness that's happening.
How interesting.
So cool.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Milosevic scared his people underground.
Slobodan.
Or
That's the one.
or
Yeah.
Aston Villa striker Savo Milosevic.
I think it was Slobodan, though. Of course, I haven't written it down, but whichever one was ruling Serbia in the 90s. He said that it would make you urinate really frequently and get heart palpitations. And everyone literally went inside, pulled all their curtains down. They were calling helplines saying, is it safe to watch it on telly?
Wow.
No one went outside, public transport all stopped. So the whole of the rest of Europe flooded outside to watch the eclipse. And all of Serbia retreated underground and indoors.
Did he have motives that we know now? Because that's a weird the urination thing. Well, where did
I
that come
agree.
from?
It's bizarre. I don't know. I don't know
what-
why. There was actually a paper saying what were his motivations, and I couldn't download the full thing, so we'll never know.
Okay.
No one, apart from people who can afford $24.99, will ever know.
But I can tell you that animal rights activists sent sunglasses to the chimps in the zoo. So scared were they.
Golly.
I think one of the coolest things that I read as part of this research is that you got the sun. We're just staring at it. We're trying to work out what's going on with it. We got nothing to compare it to.
Don't stare at it.
But we got nothing to compare it to.
Yeah.
And that's not true anymore. And it's not been true for a while because the Kepler Space Telescope, back when it was operating, monitored 150,000 stars in the Milky Way. And they found 369 suns that are incredibly similar to ours. And so now we can look at other case studies, as it were, and go, this is interesting. That sun is very active at the moment, and it wasn't 10, 11 years ago. That must mean that it's running in phases. And so we can learn via these suns that are billions of miles away about our own sun. Yeah, because there are a lot of scientists that look at our sun as a curiosity compared to other suns in that they say it's spectacularly boring in comparison to all the other suns that we're seeing in the universe. And they partially wonder if that's why we're here at all.
Yeah, that must be right. Because if it starts spitting out stuff at us every 2 or 3 years, going to die.
Exactly. So our sun is just not that active, and that's been incredible for us.
It has, and I think actually with the election coming up, sometimes you want a boring centre of your universe, don't you? Because it can be relied upon to not destroy you.
And that is a party political broadcast for Keir Starmer.
I don't know what you're talking about.
We actually had someone write in who was a space weather forecaster
Oh,
to the fish inbox.
really?
This is cool. He's called Gavin Medley.
What? dark with no weather again.
He works at the LASP, which is the Laboratory for Atmospheric and Space Physics at the University of Colorado. And he was writing about the, if the sun emits a giant electromagnetic storm, we won't get warning before it hits us.
Yeah.
But there are space weather instruments that sit on spacecraft at Lagrange points, and they just sit there in gravitational equilibrium. And one of their goals is to collect data to predict and warn about solar storms and flares, which can take down our electrical
And that's how we
infrastructure.
knew, like a few weeks ago, when they had that big solar storm that people in London couldn't see, but everyone else in the country could see.
Yeah.
The aurora.
The aurora. We know about that because of those.
Yeah.
By the way, we're in the most exciting year for the sun in 11 years. Loads of sunspots. Because the sun switches poles every 11 years.
Yeah.
So the most boring year was 2019. And that was like hardly any sunspots because the poles were just like perfectly aligned north and south. And now we're in the most feisty year, which I think might be why they've discovered this thing that your main fact was about. It's because it feels like, as a scientist, it's the most thrilling time to look at the sun because so much mad shit's going on there.
So if one of these big coronal mass ejections hits us, we're kind of buggered a little bit, right?
Yeah.
All of our electronics are going to fry, and until they fix it, it's going to be pretty tough. And we knew that this big one was coming a few weeks ago, and I was in Wales in the middle of nowhere, and so I got a load of cash out of the cash machine just in case. All of the cash machines got back, genuinely.
You're such a subtle prepper.
You're
I love
such a prepper.
it.
Your cash is no good in the after times.
But it'll get me home. Like, all I had to do was get home. I have an electric car, right? So
Right.
if I'm stuck in Wales with an electric car and all the electrics are fried, I am kind of buggered.
You're not necessarily buggered if you have to stay in Wales, James. Come on. Good people of Wales. Great place to be stranded for a while.
Great place to be, but it's not ideal for the rest of my family if I'm in Wales.
James's electric tin opener is in London. That's what he's getting back to.
Oh, he brings that with him.
I keep that in a lead-lined case in case of a coronal mass ejection. But there's a theory, right? So we could fire out a big loop of wire into space. So the entire Earth is covered by one wire.
Okay.
And then when the coronal mass ejection comes in, which is basically charged particles, then the wire can kind of ground it and it won't fry all of our electrics.
Wow.
That's interesting.
It's a really good idea. No one's really taking the idea seriously. But they reckon that the loop would cost about $100 billion to make. But if we did get hit by one of those coronal mass ejections, which will happen sometime, the cost will be way more than that.
Yeah.
Yeah?
It'll be it'll be in the trillions. It will fuck up our economy for years.
Actually, 100 billion, it sounds a lot, but actually, a lot of things when you read about it in the paper, it's like 600 billion. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
We club together.
Yeah.
We deal with that.
Well, how much did you get out of the cash point the other day?
There's a big queue behind James because the limit's 200 at a time. So
It's only 20 million a time they let me take out.
Okay, that's it. That is all of our facts. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to get in contact with any of us about the things that we've said over the course of this podcast, we can all be found on our various social media accounts. I'm on @Schreiberland on Instagram. Andy.
at Andrew Hunter M on X.
James.
No such thing as James Harkin on the TikToks.
And Anna.
You can get in touch with all of us by going to @NoSuchThing on Twitter /X or going to @NoSuchThingAsAFish on Instagram, or you can email podcast@qi.com.
Yep, or you can go to our website, nosuchthingasafish.com. All of the previous episodes are up there. There's a link to the portal, to the gateway of Club Fish, our secret private members club. And there are also links to our upcoming tour, Thunder Nerds. We're heading around Europe. We're going to Ireland. We're going to Australia. We are going to New Zealand. There are all the links up there. We put on a couple of extra shows, one in Sydney, one in London. If you missed out on tickets for those, do check it out. It's all up there. Otherwise, just come back here next week. We'll have another episode waiting for you. We'll see you then. Goodbye.